Welcome back to Loose Frame Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Martinovich, and it is a beautiful end to the summer season. Fall is in the air, and joining me as always,
I'm Hilary Weber. Hi.
And I'm Jesse Brock.
Good morning, ladies.
Happy fall.
Well, yeah, actually, you think fall. What is it? The official day of
the
fall is the 20th,
official day was
right?
Saturday,
there we
the
go.
23rd.
23rd
so
it is, okay.
We are in fall.
We are in the fall. Not that it feels like it in Florida. I think we're still in the 90s every day, but...
Yeah, it's just a technicality that it's the fall right now.
It is, but part of the fact that we can be in the fall and it still be hot out in Florida is to our benefit as a filming community, and that's why a lot of things come to Florida to film.
Absolutely.
Yes, evergreen 24/7, 365 days a year. I had to think about that. Numbers are not my strong suit, but yes, that's what we tout, and it's true most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and typically fall is actually when we start picking up for permits and projects and everything else, Hilary, because it's the start of commercial season.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had a few big projects already, so excited to see what comes out.
And hopefully the strike gets resolved soon here. Fingers crossed, and we can get back to having feature films come back to Florida and start shooting. I know there's been some waivers out there for some projects, but it's still really hurt the local economy, I think, for overall projects. But we got some good things coming up on the docket, hopefully. But we're here to talk to a filmmaker today. Who are we interviewing, Jesse?
A local filmmaker. We are talking to Ryan Justice.
And Ryan has made 2, maybe 3 movies now, I think. 3 movies in the Tampa Bay area.
Yep.
I think Follows was his first, and I think we'll be talking more today about his second film he made, which was at one point called Skunk Ape, but I think it's called Wild Man now.
The Wild Man, yes.
Yeah, which, speaking of Florida things, there's such a tapestry of movies and ideas that could be generated from just Florida's history. It's kind of crazy. And after we get back, we'll also talk about some cool stuff that has happened in Florida. I'm holding, for those not watching, Florida's a hyper-local guide to the flora, fauna, and fantasy of the most far-out state in America.
Yes,
and this is put out by A24, and it's one of the best coffee table reference books I've ever seen. It's awesome.
Amazing. And it is accurately described as the hyper-local guide.
Yeah.
Like there's stuff that you're only, if you know, you know.
Yeah. So a lot of fun. So we'll be back in a bit to talk about that. But right now, we're going to toss it to our interview with Ryan Justice. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Loose Frame Podcast. Joining me now is my guest, Ryan Justice with Justified Films. Hey, buddy, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
I appreciate you. This is our Halloween episode, so we'll talk about some spooky movies here towards the end, but I like to start things off by getting a little bit of biography background. Tell us a little about yourself. How did you get here?
So I grew up here in Tampa Bay, and went to USF. And for a lot of people that went to USF, you realize you didn't have a film program. You just had a production news program. And while there, I really was getting into films. I played sports all the way through high school. And when I got to college, somebody was like, hey, you could probably make some movies or do something like that. All my buddies were either pre-med or athletes. So
you're like the finger painter of the group. What is that weird guy doing?
So I was like, oh, cool. I'm like, I need to learn how to edit. So some, guy across the hall is like, I could get you a torrented editing software to put on your computer. So then I started editing, B-roll or stock footage clips of JFK and stuff like that. And I started planning my first short film to make. And, it was always too big of an idea to do your first stuff. I did some stuff like I was really into Vietnam history, and, I put all my buddies into the movies, and they all got Poison Oak. We shot it. And then, over time, a couple years go by, you start kind of networking, and USF did have a lot of filmmakers at the time, but just no real outlet.
Yeah.
And then Campus Movie Fest, that's out of Atlanta, came to our school, USF, in 2008, and I was like, oh, cool, make a short film, a 5-minute short film in a week. And then did that every couple of years, and from that won some awards and kind of networked with outside actors, like real actors, in the area, and then kind of just keep networking, keep pushing, and end up getting a degree in production news. I knew I didn't want to work in news, but it looked better on a resume that I could read and write. And, you know, and then, you know, after that, getting into the workforce, like after I graduated, I was a video producer for a manufacturing company out of Sarasota for a few years. But watching everybody, you know, on my, you know, Facebook feeds and Instagram feeds doing all this freelance commercial stuff for a few years, I had an opportunity in 2014 to just kind of, you know, exit that and start my own business, and because I really wanted to make feature films. And then from there was, you know, keep networking until I was able to make my first feature, Followers, and that ended up we shot that in 2016. It released in U.S. theaters in 2018, 10 cities theatrically and Walmarts across the country. And then just kept kind of working, and then eventually got to The Wild Man during pandemic. We'll talk more about that, just how that kind of came to be from us just reaching out, networking, not just in the local area, but networking and going to Nashville, going to LA, to AFM, and getting out of our market to meet other connections, and, you know, bringing them here and just showing what we could do. Because sometimes, you know, it's great to shoot here, and that's one thing I've always talked about to people, is that I love making movies here because, you know, we don't have to, you know, you don't have to go to LA anymore. You don't have to live there necessarily to make the type of movies that we're making, just because it's easier to sustain a life here. Yeah. And like a work-life balance, I really do believe, is like when you can live 15 minutes from the beach, you don't have to live with, you know, a bunch of roommates in LA, and you don't have to struggle to really.
That's interesting. We've interviewed a lot of guests over the last 2.5 years, however long we've been doing this, and that seems to be a commonality that a lot of people bring up, is just the quality of life is so much better here. And if you've lived in LA or Atlanta or New York, it's a different pace here.
Yeah. And I had several opportunities to go out there. Somebody's like, "Oh, dude, you want to come live on my couch for a few months? Come out." And I almost did it a couple times. And then I had some other opportunities here. And then, you know, kind of the window kind of closed. Then when our first feature, Followers, came out, and it was out in theaters, it was playing in LA. And I had a bunch of buddies out there that had been out there for a decade. And they're like, "Wow, you guys just made a movie, and you guys just did it. You guys did it in your backyard in Tampa. You didn't worry about what kind of cameras. You didn't worry about all this, you know, drama. You did it, you know, and it's out there." And it kind of inspired some people out there in a way. And it was kind of cool to see that. I was like, wow, you know, just being out there doesn't really change your mindset. I think that's one thing, people say, "Oh, I'm going to move to LA, I'm going to audition all the time, I'm going to do all this stuff." But if your mindset isn't like that here, I don't think it's really going to, your mindset's not really to change out there. Yeah. If you're not doing it here, I don't think you're really going to do it in LA.
No, and if anything, you're probably less likely to do it out there, because you've got extra costs and everything else just trying to live.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've always told people, like, you know, it's one thing, it's like when you're worrying about rent, when you're worrying about where your next paychecks are coming, how can you really be creative? 100%. Yeah. Yes, you can be like, you know, Sylvester Stallone, who's like one of my favorite actors growing up, and you know, you sell your dog and you get real creative when you're real hungry. Yeah. But I think there is that peace of mind knowing you're not worrying about all these different things, to be fully creative and fully embrace it.
So speaking of creativity, I mean, you mentioned like your peer group were not filmmakers, you know, pre-med and whatever else. So what actually inspired you? Like, did you just grow up consuming everything?
Yeah. So as a kid, so I was a little kid, you know, my dad was I was born in MacDill Air Force Base. So my dad had a special connection to the guy at the video store on the base. So we had all these VHSs. I was watching RoboCop Part 2, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, all these movies as a probably a 5, 6, 7-year-old. And I was even just telling Jesse, is one of my earliest movies I remember watching in theaters when I was like 6 years old was Tombstone.
Which is my unironic favorite movie of all time.
So, you know, I was always brought up on these kind of action movies, and it was me and my dad's thing. We'd go to the movies all the time. We'd watch movies. That was our thing. And I was really inspired. And it was probably around 7, 8 years old, right? Star Wars. I always had, so it was crazy. I only had Return of the Jedi for the longest time. And until they re-released like the THX versions in 1996, like a year before they released like the special editions in theaters, like I went to the Target and bought the first two so I can actually know why they all ended up on Tatooine. For years, I didn't understand what was going on. Then I became a huge Star Wars guy.
They don't all have Ewoks.
Right. I didn't understand. So it was, because it's jarring to just they're just all of a sudden on, you know, C-3PO, R2-D2 on this desert world. So Star Wars was very influenced, like a lot of filmmakers. I really enjoyed that kind of thing. I started, who's the filmmaker? George Lucas. Who are all the actors? I could tell you when I was 8 years old, I could tell you every actor in that movie. I could tell you actors. I could tell you everything. So that was, people used to think that was crazy when I was 8 years old, being able to memorize all that stuff. But yeah, Star Wars was super influential because I realized, it took me years later to realize what Star Wars really was doing for me at the time was escapism.
Yeah.
So like that was a big deal. I was like, wow, that's kind of cool to be able to make something that could get people out of their heads, out of their world for like 90 minutes, 2 hours, and like let them forget about what they're doing is pretty kind of cool.
Yeah. I always find it interesting because there's one thing, there's a lot of people who don't become filmmakers who love movies.
Right.
Otherwise we wouldn't have a job. But making that leap of looking, oh, I love this film. I could make a film. Like that's a jump.
So it was like my junior, senior year in high school. So my senior year in high school, I split schools. I went to Palmetto and Manatee County for a couple of years, but Riverview and Brandon. And it was like halfway through my senior year, I was telling my buddies, I'm like, somebody had made this short film on the news program. I was like, man, we could do that. I'm like, I know movies more than these people know movies. We could do this. And everybody's like, no, we can't make that. We don't have that. They had a nice camera. I'm like, I started writing a script. We didn't shoot for like a year from there, but like I was like, okay, we could do this. And I started baseball was over for me towards that time. I was graduating and I was going into USF with a business major. That only lasted about a year before I switched over to production.
Sorry, I was a medieval Japanese history major at one point, so
yeah, business. It was about my sophomore year. I was like, yeah, Dad, this is macroeconomics. I'm out. And I remember going to Artitude Tampa, and a couple of those schools to review, and I was like, they're not really offering anything more than what USF is offering.
Yeah.
So I made that switch, but it was like that moment where I was like, I really want to try to do this because I remember I sent a letter to UCF one time, right? My dad's like, oh, they have a film program. I'm like, oh, well, is that even practical? Because you got to remember, this is still 2006.
Yeah.
YouTube was just coming into its own. Like the summer before my freshman year in college, like my buddy's like, hey, you should get on Facebook. Like it's only for college students. So this was still early on where my first movie I ever shot on was with my mom's Kodak Easy Share camera on video mode. That's what I shot my first movie on. And then I kind of upgraded to like a mini DV tapes and stuff like that. But there was obviously not a big support group for me where my friends like, oh, cool, we'll be in your movies.
Yeah.
As long as we don't get poison oak this time. Like that was the thing. I had a lot of buddies that are now doctors that learned that some of them are allergic to poison oak. But it was that kind of just, you're young, you're kind of arrogant, you don't know really what it entails. But I loved movies, and there was kind of that short walk that, how do we create these? How do we make these things? And it was, a couple fails making them with my friends, and then learning how to edit. And that was one of the big steps. It's like, once you learn how to edit, you know how to shoot what you really need to shoot. And that was that big, there was a couple projects I did that I was like, oh, this is simpler. I can do, you learn how to shoot from learning how to edit.
You learn economy of time. Like, what do I actually have to put my effort into?
Right.
Young filmmakers spend so much time shooting stuff that will never actually end up in the film.
And then, gradually, it was like summer 2009, I was doing this like action film called One Night Stand. And that was like, I put out a Craigslist post. And back, before Craigslist, Craigslist never had a great thing,
reputation.
but I got all these great local actors that I still work with today. That's what's amazing. I put this Craigslist post out in May, June of 2009, and all these guys showed up. I was 20, almost 22. And I was like, oh my God, these people are showing up. I got Publix cookies. I did this like casting, and a couple of actors like Sean Collins, who I still work with to today. He had just moved to Florida. He had just done like an episode of the reboot of Knight Rider, and he had done all these, he was in an episode of Heroes and stuff like that. And he was coming and he showed up to my set. And I was like, oh my God, this is kind of intimidating. And all these people showing up. And there's a lot of guys that are in my Wild Man Movies followers that I met on that audition that I've, stayed collaborating with ever since.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of cool is when you kind of put yourself out there and you say, hey, I'm gonna be a filmmaker, and I'm gonna put the casting call out there. It's kind of like, you have to kind of push yourself. You got to burn your bridge, right? Burn your ships. It's like, cool, I'm going to do this casting call. This is going to make me really have to do this, and put yourself in that situation where you can't really turn back. And so that's kind of, I had those opportunities to do that. So yeah. And then from there, you just kind of gradually, you network and network and network.
Yeah. So let's talk about your first movie and what that process was like. I mean, it's one thing shooting it and then having to edit it and then see it actually realized in theaters and then out there.
So we always, so Followers is a found footage movie. And me and my co-producer, co-writer, Ian Longin, and actually Jason Henney was a producer on there too. Me and Ian were always like really obsessed with like found footage. We kind of like the style. A lot of horror fans don't like it, but there was something to Cloverfield and God, what's the other one that we like? As above, so below.
So below, yeah.
Yeah, Ian says it all the time. I can never say it right. But those movies are always really interesting to me. I was a big fan of mockumentaries, Christopher Guest stuff. So I always loved that sense of realism. And so we knew that there was an easy access to found footage. And going back that previous like decade of looking at all the different movies and how these different directors were starting, and that's one big thing too. I kind of researched body of work. Where did everybody start?
Yeah.
Like almost every major director started in a horror film. If you really look back on the actors, actresses, all start in a horror film. So we're like, okay, because if you would have told me when I was, younger that my first feature film would be a horror film, I would be like, no, it's gonna be a rom-com. I love rom-coms, right? Yeah, I tell people my top 5, When Harry Met Sally's in there. I just love that movie. But so from kind of we're in September 2015. Ian and I were sitting down. We were writing this huge outline for another movie, and then like the last hour, like, hey, if we can't make this movie, what's a movie that we can make right now with the resources that we have?
Yeah,
and that's how the movie Followers came up. We're like, cool. We have actors that we trust, right, from working with for years. We have all the equipment. We have all the lighting. We have, plenty of woods, and it took us another like 4 or 5 months. We brought on Jason Henney to come on to help us produce because he had just produced another feature, Crazy Lake. And then it was cool. We cast the lead guy. He was the first guy to cast because he was so eager. Justin Maina was he was local actor now out in LA. He did a lot of HSN stuff. He was actually in Scare Package that's on Shudder. He was actually he was found from Followers, and they saw him in Followers and put him in Scare Package. So then it was a kind of a process of getting that core group of actors that we could trust going out into the woods for 10 days and like coming back with a movie, because there was a lot of improvisation. So Sean Gloria, who we had been working with since 2009, Nishant Gagna, who I had been working with since 2009, and putting them together as these villains. And then our lead actor, he brought this girl, Amanda Delaney, who had never really acted before, but they had a great rapport, and so they could play the couple. So it was really, okay, cool. We have this trusted group of actors for our first movie. It's like, so we can trust them to go out there with their cameras, because a lot of the stuff we weren't even around. We'd let them go out into the woods, come back with footage, and come out back with scenes. It was kind of cool. So going from that, and like, okay, cool, we don't know what we have. Like first we're like, okay, cool, we'll self-distribute this movie. And then like we dealt with some crazy stuff where we missed one day of filming because of rain, and so we're like, okay, we'll come back in like a couple weeks and film it. Our lead actor tore his ACL because he was on American Ninja Warrior, and tore his ACL. We're like, oh wow, okay, we may not be able to finish this movie, because if he gets surgery, we're not shooting for 3 or 4 months. Like, are we going to come back and shoot this movie? So we had like a small window before he had to go do surgery in Miami or something. So we got all the actors together. We shot 2 days, finished the movie. Because if not, it was the most pinnacle scene of the movie. And he's actually got like a tore ACL and a scene where he gets kicked around on the ground and stuff. And then the movie's finished. We're like, okay, cool. Now we got to edit it. And we had all this other, corporate work and stuff that we were doing. And we knew AFM was coming. Because now we're in, so November 2016. So we were like, do we want to self-distribute? Do we want to spend another year or 2 on this movie self-distributing it? Or do we want to just take a chance? We had built this relationship with Marty Poole. I had for years.
Sales agent,
Fairway Film Alliance. And I met him in 2010 at Sunscreen Film Festival. And this is why I come back to networking, right? And sometimes, people are like, oh, what can you do for me now?
Yeah.
Nothing, because you don't have anything. So I always say, sometimes these relationships that you meet at these film festivals, at these events, networking events, they're not going to come to fruition right in front of you, but it's building that rapport, because eventually down the road, they could help you. And that's what it's like, fostering these relationships. So I met him in 2010. It was almost 6 years later that I actually had a product for him to actually sell. So I brought him this. I'm like, hey, what do you think? Here's a trailer. What do you think about this? And he's like, okay, Ryan, maybe it might work. I'll try it. Some people were like, oh, found footage is done. So he took it to AFM on trailer, key art, sold it, US, China, UK, made all our money back. It's great. So then we had to finish editing the movie because we sold it before we actually even finished editing the movie. So then
that puts a shot clock on you.
Yeah. So we did some reshoots, the scenes, and then we're like, great. So when's it going to release? So it released in the UK first, the summer of 2017, and then I made a relationship with the distributor who actually was out of Miami. So I started building a relationship with him because now I was like, cool. Now we'll be able to do a movie together, just without sales agents and stuff like that. So that was another thing where I was building that relationship from that little movie.
Yeah.
Now you have key to distributors, key to all this stuff. Now you have more relationship with your sales agent because now you've made him money. So it's all this little things that are building up, right? It's hours and time. It's not overnight, right? And then after we finished the movie, so it releases in the UK 2017, and then we go to AFM. I go to AFM 2017 in person, and meeting with my distributor. He's like, oh, we're gonna release the movie in theaters. I'm like, really? You still? He had said that from the beginning, and Marty would say something. I'm like, that's insane.
Yeah.
I'm like, this movie costs like $5,000 to make. Like, there's no way this movie's going out in theaters. And he's like, no, we're doing theaters. I'm like, okay. Whatever. When you send me, when I see it, on my app, I'll let you know. I'll take it serious. So then it was March 23rd. They originally were supposed to release same weekend as Black Panther, but did not. They pushed it back another month. But March 23rd, 2018. So it was in 10 cities theatrically. One was at the University Mall, so that was cool. So we were able to do a big gathering there. It was actually running the same week as Gasparilla Film Festival.
Yep.
So everybody's like, oh, cool. Can I use my Gasparilla pass? I'm like, no. This is actually like a theatrical release.
Buy a ticket, please. It'll help
this
me.
is a real theatrical thing. And then there was Movie Pass was a thing at the time.
Yeah.
So I had everybody with their movie passes. You could use your movie pass to go, buy a ticket because it still will actually count as a sale. But we had people it was kind of cool seeing reviews from people I had no idea, seeing it in Ohio, seeing it in Seattle, Washington, because they had a movie pass. They would just go see whatever movie because it didn't really cost them anything. But there were even reviews and finding our movie. It was kind of neat. And people in LA going to see it. And then, it was a really cool experience. I really didn't think with the climate of theatrical and stuff I'll ever have a movie in theaters. Is that possible? But, our distributor, Synchronized Films at the time, believed in the film. It was our first theatrical release as a distribution company. And it was cool. It was something I don't know many people will actually have that opportunity to do as any filmmakers. And I'm like, this is gonna be my smallest movie ever, but it'll be the only movie that gets the theaters. It's crazy, but it was a cool experience. I had my grandparents were, my family was there, and then my dad would live down in Miami, so he was able to see it in the Miami screening, AMC down there in Aventura. So it was a really cool. It was a really cool moment. And then a month later, released in Walmarts across the country. So I had people from, a girl I was in middle school with. I didn't even know she was following me on Facebook, right? She sends me a Snapchat of her movie she just bought in Kentucky. She's like, look, I got your movie. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. I had people from all over the country sending me that they found it in different stores. People I didn't really ever talk to. Like, hey, I saw your movie here. I picked it up at this thing. So you realize that there's, you might get some likes and comments on Facebook. You don't realize there's a lot of people out there that support you that you may not even know, or they're looking at you as, wow, that the guy's doing what he dreams of doing, and it's kind of neat. So that there was always that kind of cool satisfaction of, we know obviously followers. Yeah, you look it up. It doesn't have great reviews sometimes, but it's an interesting movie.
Well, you did it. That's the most important thing.
And that's what I always tell people. I'm like, there's great ideas, but the importance is do your movie. You talk about it. You can have meetings about it and Zoomies about it, but the importance is doing the movie because there is a lot of people that love talking about making movies.
Constantly, and I won't name any names, but I hear it all the time. And the fact is you will never progress as a filmmaker unless you're actually making films.
Right. And I've talked a few times, and then a lot of people don't know they'll talk, oh, well, they'll want to hear about distributors and all this. I'm like, that's great. But tell me, who's your camera person?
Yeah.
Who's your thing? And I always tell you, it's so important to build a team because I really do believe movies is only the only art form that you really can't do by yourself. It's one of those things you can go paint, you can go do all these things by yourself, But movies, you really need to be able to collaborate people and bring people together, and they have to follow you to the end. And sometimes they don't know what they're really doing. What is this really vision? Like, why is this? Why is the guy who's doing the lighting also dressing up as Bigfoot in a movie? Like, and you're getting, people have to trust you, and that's the thing. And that comes from building a reputation of completing your films. If it's a short film, it's a music video, it's a commercial. Completing films. Is the film getting completed for your actors? Is it getting into a film festival? Is it just where is it playing? So that, I think there's that reputation that comes with completing a film first, getting it out there, because I think actors will more likely work with you if they see completed project, and that goes across the board in every level.
Well, it's like the old thing, if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, did it make a sound, right? If you make a movie and no one ever sees it, you didn't make a movie, you made a home video,
right? And that's the thing. I've talked to actors like, oh, should I work with this person? I'm like, well, when you're working like local actors, or you're not getting paid much, but even if you are getting paid, I always say you should be interviewing and auditioning the producers. What has the producer done? Do they have a reel? What have they because you're really trading your time.
Yeah.
If you're going to spend 14 hours on a short film a day and you're going to be in there, you want to make sure you're going to get your reel, your 30 seconds HD high quality clip to put in your reel. That's your trade-off. That's what the producer's trading with you. And I always tell actors, I'm like, you should be auditioning your producer. Look them up, because as much as the role looks really good on paper, you're playing this, strong female character or something like that. What does that producer actually put out into the world? Is it like how many credits on IMDb do they have, and where can you find those films completed? Is it on YouTube? Have they ever been in Gasparilla Film Festival? Have they ever been in Sunscreen? Are they submitting the films, or what?
Yeah.
So
but you're absolutely right. It is a trade-off in time, and if they're not going to help promote the film themselves and help get it out there, then you've wasted your time.
Right.
Just because you brought up AFM, I think you're actually the first person to talk about going to an actual market.
Yeah.
And whether it's Marché du Film or Berlinale or any of the big markets, I was always surprised when I went to my first market, just at the slew of content that is out there. And everyone's like, oh, I'm making a movie. It's like, everyone's making a movie. Like, you can do this too.
Yeah. So I've gone 3 times. So 2017, after we had sold followers in the AFM before, I was like, I really want to get out there. And, getting to see, at the time, Marty Poole, who was my sales agent, had his own office there. So I got to visit and see what he was doing. And at the time he was shopping Bernie the Dolphin, that also was shot here. And so watching that was really interesting. And just walking around what's cool about it, and what's cool about AFM, cool about LA, it's an entire city based around one industry.
Yeah.
And it's really cool when you go to a restaurant, when you go to a bar, everybody knows what the heck you're talking about. Everybody knows your movie references, because that's what it is. That's one thing about LA that's really cool. It's like everybody knows what you're talking about. You're not the one guy in the corner talking about movies.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about movies. There are people going to join in the conversation with you. So AFM is really cool. There's just like, it's all this marketing content. Everybody's there for the business. And I do a lot of, conferences and videos and corporate stuff like that. So I'll go to trade shows for all different financial stuff, and, trade shows for cooking and beverages and stuff like that. And you go to AFM, and this is one big trade show, market, conference, everything about movies. These guys are from all over the world, just selling and buying. Who's in your movie? What's the genre? And it's really cool to see that you're like, wow, this is kind of neat. You're in this. You're not that far away from it. When you go, you're like, wow, you can have a couple conversations with people, and you're like, wow, that guy did this. This guy did this. I sat in a wine party once, and next thing you know, the guy I'm talking to was the personal assistant for Michael Madsen, and he's like, yeah, helped him do this one movie. I'm like, I've seen that movie. He's like, you saw that movie? And I'm like, yeah, I think I rented it on Netflix like 10 years ago. I was like, yeah. I helped him get that script, blah, 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 blah. And another funny thing is Marty Poole, one of his first movies, I bought from Blockbuster in like summer 2007. He helped produce a movie with Amy Adams, James Van Der Beek, and he doesn't like talking about that movie, but because he got shafted. But I was like, wow, that's kind of cool, Mario. I've seen this movie. He's like, you seen that movie? I'm like, yeah. Like I used to dig through these Blockbuster previously viewed sections, and when I saw back in the day, they would in those mid 2000 late 2000 like decade, they would throw a bunch of actors on a movie, and you'd help you push the DVD sales. But it's kind of cool when you start to piece those together. It's not that huge of an industry. It's a very small world when it comes to it. This past so from 2017, that was really cool. Had some good connections from there. I met this really cool guy in summer 2018 in Nashville. I went to a film conference called FilmCom, and I went there 3 summers in a row. The first time I got my buddies together, I'm like, hey, you know what? We're going to drive up to Nashville. It looks promising. And it was not great. It was put on by Film Nashville, and they said, listen, this was not a good showing. We're going to give you free tickets. Come out. It was really cool. They show you all around Nashville. It's really neat. But there was a couple connections I met. So I was like, man, this was kind of a bust. Because then we went down to Atlanta for another film conference. So we did this big trip. So the next summer, a couple of the guys that I'd met were like, hey, you need to come back. I'm like, okay. So then me and the Jalbert brothers drove up to Nashville, and we did it again. And it was better, right? Meeting more contacts. Met at the time, Buffalo 8 was there when they were very early on. This is 2017, 2018, 2019. And then so the thing is keep showing up is so important in the film industry, because people always show up once.
Yeah.
But it's those guys that keep showing up second, third, fourth, 5 years in a row where you start to get taken seriously. You're like, okay, this guy is actually serious about the business because he shows up. He's investing in himself constantly. So then on the 3rd year we went to Nashville, we actually got to speak on a panel about our working with distribution, followers, and working with local film commissions, all that kind of stuff. And we got to speak on a panel on the 3rd year. And so they took us more seriously because we kept showing up. And then that guy who I met in Nashville, right? We almost started a business together with crypto. It's one of those things, you keep showing up, you keep showing that you are invested and you're serious. People, and then, although I'm 35, people still look at us as young until you get in your late 30s, early 40s. People in this industry start taking you seriously because you're like, oh, okay. You've been here so long. You've been doing this for so long. We can take you seriously. We know you're not going to, leave.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, it took 6 years for that relationship with Marty Poole to pay off.
Yeah.
And, you're right. I mean, America has almost 400 million people.
Yeah.
And there's literally 500,000 approximately people working in the film industry.
Yeah.
500,000 people. I mean, that is infinitesimally small compared to the actual population.
Yeah.
So you do end up meeting people and running into them over and over again if you, like you said, put your time in and keep showing up.
Yeah. So going to the film comms in Nashville and taking those risks, 13-hour drive to Nashville is not fun. So doing those 3 times in a row, we didn't fly, we drove, we made a trip out of it, okay, cool, we're gonna make these pitch decks and business plans. I think in my first time I went there, I pitched 824, or no, it was Neon Pictures. One of those guys, I was pitching projects, but it is going and getting out there, meeting other people, because you can get really short-sighted being in Tampa Bay or being in any of your small towns, because you get caught up in the drama of local film production. You're like, well, in the scope of things, this means a lot, but getting out there and seeing the rest of the world, seeing, okay, having meetings with other producers, other distributors, understanding the actual big business of it, you'll be like, oh, this doesn't really mean anything in the whole scheme of things. Doesn't mean a big hill. What is it? What's the saying from Casablanca? It's not a hill of beans.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. It helps you open your eyes, makes you humble a little bit too, and it'll make you go crazy because you go to AFM, you're like, oh my God, everybody's making a movie.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah. You're like, okay, well now you know where the bar is. Okay, cool. This is what we need to do if you want to keep doing this for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You meeting these distributors, meeting these sales agents, and having, investing in yourself and knowing if you're making a short film, what is that short film for? What is the purpose for a short film? Every once in a while I'll do a short film, but if it's a proof of concept for a bigger film. We did a short film in 2015 called Rogue Island. It was a short film, and we were like, cool, we're gonna make this into a feature one day. Well, let's do we'll do 10 pages from it, one scene. So that ended up getting optioned at one point at Gasparilla Film Festival by Randall Emmett. So that was kind of a cool thing at one point. And then, that was a 2-3 day shoot, a short film. But we got to do some cool stuff, and But it helped with the resume, putting that on a resume at one point. And then we did a cool vampire short film in 2018. Paul Wilson's a vampire hunter in it. Sean Michael Glory, who did 8 episodes on 50 Cent's BMF show on Stars. They're all in it. We did that in a 2-day shoot. We're like, I always like dread these like short films that last. People are shooting for months at end, and it's just like, get it. The actors are committing their time. If you can get it done in a short amount of time and get what you need to get, get it done. So we did that, and then that just got optioned this past year from a producer with CAA, and so that script is with CAA right now. I don't know, nothing's working because of the SAG right now, or the strikes, but it's making these little projects that have legs, or if it's a passion project, like creating something. These short films are, they don't make money, but you can create something that will then go into a bigger project, or maybe give you something that you can sell.
Sure.
And if you're going to spend your time doing a short film, don't like spend 6 months doing one. You'd be surprised what you can get done in a week.
Yeah. So let's advance the story here and move on to Wild Man, which was your next feature.
Yes.
When did you shoot Wild Man?
So Wild Man was shot in late September of 2020.
Yeah, because it was like pandemic.
Yep.
No one was working. I remember you came to me and like, hey, I need like a giant campus that I can shoot on.
Yeah. We so obviously March 2020, COVID happens, and at the time in January of that year, we had the Jobber Brothers had put on this really cool event in Clearwater called Hacking Hollywood, and brought in a bunch of people from different events that we had met, AFM, FilmCom in Nashville, and some other investors that came in from New York. So from there, we were pitching projects, we were meeting. It was great. There was a great atmosphere. We didn't know it was a super spreader event at the time, but it was the first week of January. So all those people went to Sundance, and then there was a huge like super spreader event at Sundance. But anyways, so we made some really cool contacts there. And then, I was actually in New York City the first week of March, and I was doing a shoot for like Volkswagen or something. And then on the way back is when they canceled everything. I was going to go to South by Southwest and all this. They're like, oh, South by Southwest canceled, all this stuff. So I was like, wow, all right. So are we going to be able to make a movie this year? Like, this sucks. So then I got everybody together, like we were like on Zooms and like talking, like let's take this time to like build up our pitch decks and all this stuff. So we had met one investor out of New York, and once again, this comes back to like rapport and building like all these little projects. Everything that you do, you never realize that maybe it's connected somehow. So this investor out of New York had an assistant, like who was doing all his like film liaison stuff, because he was kind of new to the business. And I'm like, man, this name sounds really familiar. Her first feature film was distributed by my distributor, my followers, and we knew of each other's films, so that it built rapport right there. So then I'm telling her, I'm like, hey, I got all these different projects we want to do. I send out the pitch decks to her, and then because I'd met him at the Hacking Hollywood event, because he was looking for these like mid-range horror, $50,000 to $100,000 movies to invest in. So I'm like, okay, here's like 4 projects. I sent him all these pitch decks. She's like, is there anything else? I'm like, there's this one idea. We've been kicking it around for years. It's like 2014. Have you ever heard of the skunk ape? And
there's people who listen to this who are not from Florida. Yeah. So what is the skunk ape?
So the skunk ape is the Florida Bigfoot. Okay. It gets its name because of its this meth-like stench that it gets from like the swamps and the Everglades. And so she's like, I remember she's like, did you say skunk ape? And that's what they always say. They always say that. Every time I say it over the phone, did you say skunk ape? And I'm like, yeah. It's the Florida Bigfoot. She's like, okay. I'm like, we have this project, let me put something together real quick, and I'm going to send you this new pitch deck tomorrow. And I called my buddy Ian. We've been talking about it for years, because we had been talking about it for years. And then when Kevin Smith was doing his project here, I think he was doing an interview with Tony Armour.
Yeah, Kilroy.
Yeah. And he had, Tony had brought up the skunk ape to him, and Kevin Smith had said, oh yeah, some Florida filmmakers should probably do that. And I remember Ian calling me. He's like, yeah, did you see the Kevin Smith interview? He's like, oh my God, that's kind of cool. And I think that was maybe about a year before we finally got into it. But so we're like, okay, I sent them the pitch deck. They liked the idea. They liked the price. They liked what we could do, and we could start shooting in September. And this is the end of May at this point. So we're in the pandemic for about 2 months at this point. And we were just I was writing and my buddies writing pitch decks. It was like all this stuff. And so this was the one movie that they liked. I was like, okay, we're going to do this. Let's go make a movie. So then we started making phone calls in early June. I reached out to Anthony Pernick of iHorror. I'm like, hey, who's that guy who did your monster suit for one of your movies? Oh, it's Derek Garcia. He was on Sci-Fi's Face Off and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to reach out to him. And we got connected. I'm like, hey, we're doing this movie. We want to see what you'd be interested in doing. Yeah. He's like, well, with Pinhead, we're not working. Like, because he was on Doom Patrol. He was on these big shows, but nothing was filming. So he had plenty of time. So we're like, yeah, this is what so he starts sending concept stuff. And I was like, that's cool. I'm like, yeah, I kind of let him do his own creative thing, gave him some different ideas. We liked, this like Predator look. One of my biggest notes was like, I feel like a lot of recent Bigfoot like suits or like Bigfoot in pop culture, he looks way too friendly. Like you could have a beer with him. So I'm like, when they see this Bigfoot, I don't want them to want to have a beer with him. I want them to run. And like when you go into the Florida woods and people talk about going into the Florida woods, there's so many crazy things. There's big bugs. I'm like, you go into the Florida woods, you shouldn't want to, like, anything you see in the Florida woods, you want to run.
Yeah.
So that was one thing, as I wanted to be scary. So in the early weeks of June, so he started building the suit, started sending us all these like really cool renderings of stuff that he was creating. We're like, cool. At the same time, we're like, okay, well, I guess we should start writing the script. So because it was always backwards, right? It's crazy. Sometimes I always tell people, like, don't get so caught up on the movie you really want to make, because sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. That even like Scorsese and all these guys, the movies they really want to make, they don't get to make when they want to make. They get to make it when the investors are ready to go, and so they got to make other projects in between. So this was not, at the time, it was not the movie we wanted to make, but it was the movie that we were allowed to make at the time. So then I think it was around mid-June. I think I phoned you because like Ian's like, we should probably go through the commission this time. Like, you should really do this right. I'm like, yeah, I agree. So we called you, like, we're looking for all these different things. And one thing was we needed a Area 51 government facility looking thing. And at the time, I remember when people were using Mosey or talking about using Mosey for film stuff.
Which is the Museum of Science and Industry, which is defunct now. I mean, there's a space, but I'm talking about the old space.
Yeah, and as a kid, I went there kindergarten or like first grade, third grade, fifth grade. Like it was part of like the Hillsborough County. Like you went on 2 field trips a year. One was going to be Mosey. One was going to be Laurie Park Zoo. If you got lucky in the 4th, 5th grade, you got to go to Epcot or what was the other? Islands of Adventure. That was my 6th grade year. But we always went to the Mosey and Laurie Park Zoo. Those were 2 like given field trips. So I'd always gone to Mosey. So I was like, okay, cool. This could be neat. And we did like the walkthrough with Tyler. I was like, this will be neat. We can all this and we do this. And then we had the woods, because obviously the wild man lives in the woods. So we were able to kind of build out. So then knowing that we had that access to that facility in that area, we could start kind of building, okay, now that we have this and we have Plant City, we can start building the story around what locations we have. Because that's sometimes the toughest thing with independent film is you really don't know what you have.
Yeah.
So you could write this amazing story. You're like, wow, that's not going to happen on this budget. That's not going to happen in this town. Okay, well, this and this. Okay. So we have all these facilities and we have all these locations built in that we already have locked down. We're like, cool. Now let's build this story around this. And so then, then now it's like July. Is actually August. So I just looked at my pictures. 3 years ago, we drove up to Atlanta to get my buddy Tim Bettinghouse, who's a local gaffer. He gaffed Netflix Selling Tampa show, and he was always a lighting guy. But I always put him on movies. And he was, at the time, it was hard to like find an actor that you trusted enough, that was tall enough and lean enough to really get into a suit. So I called him up. I'm like, Tim, what do you think about being our Bigfoot? He's like, I'm down. Yeah, whatever you got to. And I was like, all right. So we drove up. It was 3 years ago last week to Atlanta. He brought his wife, and he had to get fitted in the suit, and they had to put all this green slime and put him in the cast to get the final measurements. Because at that point we were shooting in like 6 weeks from there. So that was their final thing they had to do. And then 6 weeks later, we were filming. And one of the other things that was really cool, Michael Paré, I had worked with earlier in the year on another feature film that Tom Parnell, Mark Savage had produced called Painkiller. And Michael Paré was there, and I was the AD. And so we had made a relationship. I'm like, I didn't know if this. I'm a big fan of Paré because of the movie Streets of Fire.
Yeah.
Streets of Fire. I stumbled across.
We talk about Streets of Fire a lot. I love that movie.
Yeah. So Streets of Fire was actually one of the first movies. It was 2008, early 2009, and Netflix had it on Watch Instantly. So that's what Netflix was calling their original thing, was Watch Instantly. So it was on their thing. I'm like, what is this movie? It's got Diane Lane and Willem Dafoe and Bill Paxton.
Post-apocalyptic rockabilly musical.
You know what I always say? It's like weirdly like Purple Rain meets The Outsiders. And
it's pretty good.
And that's why I always caught up with it. And I'm like, who's Michael Paré? He's the lead guy. He's the first name that pops up with all these actors. And I watched that, and I'm like, I remember texting my dad. I'm like, Dad, do you ever see this movie? He's like, yeah, I saw that in theaters. It's got Diane Lane in it. I'm like, yeah. And then I hear all the music. I'm like, I know this music because I'm a big 80s guy. I was born in 87, but I love 80s music, love 80s movies. So I was like, okay, this movie's amazing. And then like, I remember putting people on that movie for a long time. Then after watching Streets of Fire, then I watched Eddie and the Cruisers. So I knew who Michael Paré was from there. And then, getting to work with him. And then I was like, okay, cool. We had reached out to him, and our investor became friends with him too at the time. And so he's like, he's really into Bigfoot. And I'm like, really?
What a weird coincidence.
Yeah. So I'm like, all right. And he's never done a Bigfoot movie. So I was like, okay. I'm like, man, is this the movie we want to be the first one to work with him? And he had a lot of insight. He had a lot of notes. He's like, Bigfoots do this and Bigfoots do that and this, and this. I'm like, okay, we put in the script. Like one of the lines from the movie that Michael Paré had influence on was one of the best lines from David McMahon. He's a local actor, Florida actor, and he plays our skunk ape tracker. And it's about that they use menstrual blood to attract Bigfoots and animals. And that was Michael Paré's idea. They use menstrual blood. I'm like, okay. I was on a phone call with Michael Paré, and he's like, yeah, I'm like, you got to put that in the script. I'm like, all right, I'm going to put it in the thing. And, it's one of these lines in the movie that people laugh at all the time because it's kind of improvised in there. I'm like, Dave, you got to kind of add this in. And, but yeah, like, Paré he was really cool to work with because he was calling me every day on the script. Like I have a script change. I haven't even seen the script change yet. And he's like, hey, I got this new script. Can you talk about it? I'm like, yes. I'm like, well, what do you want to tell? He's like, well, this should be this should be this. I should be probably saying this. This guy is a private, but he should be a sergeant. It was pretty cool. Because obviously he was in the pandemic too, right? Yeah. We're all in this. He's sitting home reading scripts, wanting to do movies. And so obviously Paré came on. It was cool. It was a cool thing to know. Because I think it's, people are like, oh, you get starstruck or something. I'm like, it's not really starstruck, but it's cool to know you're meeting people that were in stuff that influenced you.
Yeah.
So like one of my first celebrity things, I went to LA in like summer 2009, and I got a picture with Judd Nelson. He was at this really weird film festival in LA, and we had to go there to get credit for USF, like to pay for our trip to LA. And Judd Nelson was there. I'm like, the Breakfast Club? Or yeah, like I'm taking a picture with Judd Nelson. He's like, oh, are you getting Star Trek? I'm like, it's Judd Nelson. He's from the Breakfast Club. You know how many movies that like those are movies that are like, why do you make movies?
Yeah,
And so I remember that was one of the first celebrities I ever met. I think that and like that kind of person. And obviously in 2010, like Billy D. Williams was at Sunscreen and stuff like that. But it's pretty cool when you see Michael Paré and you remember, like I remember like 2008, 2009, I'm watching this movie, Streets of Fire, and I was like, man, like this was a really cool movie. And at the time I was in college, probably I was going through a breakup. Like you remember where you were and you remember what this movie made you feel. Yeah. And you kind of realize, man, this is kind of cool to have this cool culmination. Now you're directing Michael Paré. You're taking a photo with him. You're like, it's kind of a cool thing. And I think some people get caught up, you're not understanding, and it's something I have the same thing. Is like you not realizing your successes, or like you're like, oh, this is a really cool moment. You should enjoy this, because we're always so worried. What's the next project? How do we get up to this level?
Yeah.
And not appreciating the level that we're at right now. That when you're 6 years old, you're like, what? You made a movie that was in theaters? Like your 6-year-old self would be like ecstatic. So it's one of those things that's kind of cool. And then obviously the Wild Man. I completed in October, and then we took it to AFM. And we were hoping in 2020, with everything happening, that there would be kind of a bigger market because there wasn't much product being created. But AFM was virtual that year, and nothing happened.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, well, we obviously got some incentive money back from Tampa, and we're like, you know what? Let's put the money back into the movie. Let's reshoot the ending. Let's do some cool stuff. And so in January of 2021, we rented the Victory ship. That's over, I don't know, is it Armature Works now, or where's that now?
Water Street.
The Water Street. So we got to rent that because we had some people that have shot there before. We're like, let's go. Like, we needed to extend out this facility. Like, we only got so far in some of these places. Like, maybe the Victory ship could be cool. So we rented that out for 2 days to reshoot the ending, put the money back into that. So then we got into Popcorn Frights Film Festival that's out in Fort Lauderdale that summer, and that was like our world premiere. And then we took the movie back to market in 2021, where we had some other offers. I didn't like them. It was kind of crazy to think that Followers years earlier got better offers, distribution offers, than Wow. Man, we're like, that doesn't make sense. But the film industry sometimes doesn't make sense when it comes to, like, it's not an easy, product. You create a better product so you get more money. It just sometimes doesn't work like that. And then with the market and everything was just different. So we would end up getting a distribution deal. We had worked with this guy before, we had gone with Marty. He tried to sell it the way we sold it, but we weren't getting the offers that we liked, because we know in distribution, filmmakers, if you understand, like, MGs are great, minimum guarantees, it's upfront money, and then after the distributor makes that money back that they gave you, then you start to see a cut. So if you guys look up MGs, minimum guarantees. But also, if you do your research, that's like the bad side of distribution, is that might be the only money you ever see. And knowing that, if we got like a $10,000, a $15,000, a $20,000 offer, well, that doesn't cover our budget. So why would we do that? We'd rather do a rev split with another distributor, a smaller distributor that's going to take care of the movie a little bit better. Maybe they're not going to give us upfront money, but they'll do a rev split. And obviously, that's not the best deal, but it was the best deal that we had.
Yeah,
so
but they're also not making money unless they're actually pushing the movie.
Right.
So.
And that was a big thing too, is if you do have a feature film and you're looking to distribute, MGs are great, upfront money is great, but looking at the expenses, what are their qualified expenses in their contract? That's the biggest thing. So that was that's things that we had red flags for, because we had some offers from distribution companies. I'm like, cool, $15,000 up front, $10,000 up front. What's their expense cap? Like $50,000. Yeah. I'm like, that's
why
crazy.
you never see profit, because
right.
and
and it's called, that's the Hollywood accounting, right? And we actually had that technically with our Followers movie. We've never seen another dime from a Followers movie, just because we're in the red. It is what it is. But it's what sucks is kind of like we got what we needed out of that movie. We made our money. We made some money, but we got the relationships that we wanted. We got the rapport that we wanted to move on to the second one. We got like a proof of like that we could do it.
Yeah.
Right, to investors, that we could create a movie, get it sold, make money, and we could do it again. Because I think always people are like, oh, I want to go make this $1 million movie. But have you? What I like to say, have you created a lemonade stand first? Make your, do a lemonade stand, turn a profit, then move on to the next business.
Yeah.
And that's what's tough. Some people want to make that big jump, want to make their dream project. Sometimes it's like, making a profitable lemonade stand first is a way to go. So you prove yourself to investors, prove yourself to other people in the business that you can be.
Yeah. Well, the quickest way to stop working in the industry is lose someone money. Right.
And that's something we're very, Ian Longin is like we've been producing movies we've been working together for about 11 years. So we do, I met him on doing a short film in 2012. And I always tell people it's very important when you're doing these short films is working with different people, right? Because I always say short films are like dating. You're trying to figure out who you can have a real commitment with, who can you make a big movie with? Because making a feature film is not a weekend 48-hour film festival. It's a 1 to 2 year commitment with somebody that you're going to see them all the time. You're going to share bank accounts, LLCs. You're going to sign contracts with them. So if you can't spend more than 48 hours with them, you shouldn't make a feature film with them. So like I always say, doing those short films, those are really great just to see who you can really work with for the long term.
That's excellent advice.
And that's what I've kind of done for years. And I'll see, I like that guy. I'm going to keep that guy in my back pocket. That's why looking back, since I've been making films since, short films in 2009 to 2010, a lot of the same people that are in my short films in 2010, they're still here today.
Yeah. And that's not unique to you. I mean, look at any person working, they tend to work with the same people over and over again.
And that's the thing is like, figuring out that it's important. It's a team effort. You got to find your team, and that's what's always tough. It's like, oh, we'll move to LA. I'm like, I got to find another team that I trust.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice, and I'm getting the high sign from our studio audience here. So we need to start wrapping this up, unfortunately. But let's talk briefly about following Wild Man. I was almost calling it Skunk Ape. Where can people see it or find it?
So the Wild Man got released. It's on Tubi. It's on Amazon to rent and buy. It's on most platforms. But I prefer if you want to rent and buy it from Amazon, that'd be great. Tubi, it's also there. If you're not familiar with Tubi is one of the biggest money making things for independent films right now, just because it's considered an AVOD, ad supported video on demand. So that's where a lot of independent films are making their money right now.
Yeah, and are you getting just because you brought up Tubi, are you getting an ad share? Or any revenue from that?
Yeah. So when our first quarters came out, honestly, Tubi was our top money coming from it. And you'd be surprised. It's scary. It's something you asked me 10 years ago, but YouTube is actually generating money.
Yeah.
So what people are doing with YouTube now, and what's kind of wild to think about this, and you got to kind of change your thinking about YouTube, because it took me a while. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to put our movie on YouTube? But YouTube has their own AVOD setup, right? They have commercials through their YouTube on these major channels like Joe Blow Movies. There's another one. Kings of Horror has their own channel where they have all these indie horror films. So those are actually generating money. And I mean, shoot, they generated more money than my iTunes sales. So it's another revenue stream that I think independent filmmakers are going to start learning over the next few years. Our distributor, Terror Films, we knew about Terror Films years ago. We actually submitted our first feature followers to them at the time because they had done the Hell House found footage movies, and they were on our radar. But man, we liked Hell House. Like, we should reach out to them. They didn't like followers at the time, and then they actually approached us after they saw Wild Man. I think I had put out a newsletter, and that's a powerful thing. Email newsletter from your website or something, just putting announcements. You don't know what's on your email list or something. Maybe somebody will see it. And Terror Films saw it, and it was kind of cool. They approached us at the time. Because once again, right, we didn't have what they wanted before, but 3-4 years later, we had exactly what the product they wanted. So it's one of those things. You don't write off anybody that says, hey, you know what, time isn't right now, but maybe down the road.
Yeah.
And that down the road is actually a possible thing. Some people think it's, they're never going to call us, but down the road actually can happen.
Yeah. So speaking of websites, where can people find more about you? What's your social
So I'm
handles?
pretty well branded. Justified Films on Instagram, justifiedfilms.net on my website. Justified Films across the board. So,
well, Ryan, it's been fabulous. I appreciate it. Happy Halloween to you, even though we're recording this in August.
As of right now, you can check my Facebook. I think I'm going to be doing a Barbie kin for Halloween. We'll see if I keep up with that.
I'll look forward to that. Appreciate it. Thanks again, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. That was a really interesting interview. I really got some tidbits out of that. I liked it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I've talked to Ryan Justice at every networking event. Basically, he's always there. Like he was saying, just got to keep showing up.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point to take away from that conversation.
Well, and one of the parts that I liked the best was him talking about how a movie that inspired him, and then he met the actor and then ended up working with the actor later on. And we sort of have a connection, me and Hilary. And he mentioned Breakfast Club and going out to LA and getting to meet Judd Nelson. But we also know someone from Breakfast Club.
Yeah, we actually both studied with Andrew Meyer, who is the producer in the Breakfast Club, one of my favorite professors from SCAD.
Yeah, and that was cool too, because he didn't just do Breakfast Club. And what else did he produce?
Oh my gosh, he did fried green tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, Birdie. What else am I forgetting? There's a huge list.
Yeah, I mean, every John Hughes movie, I think, up until he died. So that was cool too. I mean, he mentioned pausing to reflect on your wins and realizing sort of your milestones, and being able to have been taught by someone like Andy Meyer, who's been there, done that, and again, like you grew up watching these movies, and it's like, this is the dude who made those movies.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and that was very mindful of him to kind of bring that up. And when he was talking about like celebrating your wins, and like what would, we're always trying to climb, but what would your younger self would be so proud of you right now. So that was just really an important reminder.
Yeah. What other takeaways did you guys have?
I thought he had a really good outlook on networking. Just you've got to constantly be out there, constantly meeting people, constantly talking to people, because you never know, someone might not be helpful to you right now, but 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, things might have changed a little bit, and now suddenly you guys might be able to work together. So always talk to people, always refresh your contacts, make sure you're still like keeping in touch with them, because you never know when that's going to come back around.
He also mentioned, he went out to LA and he had all these scripts and thought one of those would be the one that would hit. And then they passed in all of those and like, what else you got, kid? And I think that's a really important thing, is always have other plans.
Yes.
Yeah. Something in your back pocket.
Yeah.
Because the timing isn't always right. Sometimes you're ahead of your time, and it all kind of, pop culture is a very big deciding factor in what gets made and when it gets made. So if you're sitting on something, and he mentioned like Scorsese and other big directors deal with the same thing, where it's like you can make what you want to make, but maybe not right now. Maybe you need to work on something else now.
And speaking of pop culture, I mentioned at the top of the episode this awesome book by A24. Again, it's Florida, a hyper-local guide, the flora, fauna, and fantasy of the most far-out state in America. It is just awesome. It is like 500 pages of just random pop cultural niche stuff from Florida. And since we were talking about Skunk Ape, which became Wild Man, which is definitely a Florida-centric myth, let's talk a little bit about some undiscovered stories that people might not be aware of in Florida. So why don't you start, Hilary? Anything in the mythology or interesting craziness in Florida that should be made into a movie?
Oh, undiscovered that should be made into a movie.
Yeah, that wasn't the assignment, I thought.
Well, what did I say about pivoting?
Well, I think one of the most interesting stories in Tampa right now is all these lost cemeteries that they're discovering and rediscovering that.
Yeah, lost African-American cemeteries.
Yeah, well, I mean, both, I think. I mean, it's all kinds of graves, and there's not just one cemetery that they've like located. There have been multiple sites throughout Tampa, and so I've been really interested, as someone who does genealogy and research and things like that, to kind of figure out what's going to happen with that, what they're going to do on like the legal side of things, because the people
because it's like Poltergeist, where you move the headstones but you didn't move the bodies.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot of people that are living over dead people right now in Tampa Bay.
They may not know it.
Yeah, and absolutely may not know it. I live what probably is over a cemetery that wasn't moved, which is probably why I'm cursed. But yeah.
I could do it.
It could. But that's great. And I think it will be made into a documentary at some point.
I hope so.
Something like that just can't be ignored.
I hope so.
And that's one of our good friends, Paul Guzzo, he primarily covers film and pop culture and stuff like that. And then the cemeteries are his huge project.
He was the one who sort of kicked over the headstone, if you will.
Oh, wow. The headline writes itself.
Was that too much? But he was the one that sort of like, oh, this is interesting. And he started digging down. Pun not intended. Sorry.
You're writing the movie right now.
But he discovered all these things. And I think that's something unique about Florida. There's so many stories that people just don't know about or haven't scratched the surface on.
Do you have one in mind, Tyler?
I do. So I don't know if a lot of people know this, but during the 50s and 60s, there was a group called the Highwaymen, which were all African-American artists, and they are some of the most prolific artists in history. Like I think their output was over 5,000 some odd pieces of art that they created, and they would walk up and down A1A with their art literally hung from their back as they walk up and down, and they would just stop little pop-ups from town to town and sell their wares. And I think that's a really interesting story that people don't know about, and something that absolutely should be turned into a documentary, a movie someday, I hope.
And most of their work was very Florida-based.
Yes,
it's all like Florida locations and beaches and palm trees and beautiful like Florida imagery.
So it should definitely be made here.
It absolutely should, if it ever is. It would be a travesty if that were to shoot in
It is Halloween,
Atlanta.
and I said earlier, nothing is scarier than a Florida story being made not in Florida.
Yeah, like Florida Man, which is a movie about the eponymous Florida Man, that everyone hears about on the internet.
Yeah, but like you guys said, I mean, Florida Man is, that's a headline and it's not always in the best light, but we have stories here that are cherished and undiscovered.
Yeah, more than meth and gators.
Yes. How come you never see Florida Man rescues a school bus that was on fire? Florida Man saves kittens in a tree.
Because Florida Man probably lit the school bus on fire in the first place.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, well.
So what about you, Jesse?
Well, undiscovered, I don't really have anything that comes to mind, but I was going to just mention the movie Hoot because it was very impressionable. It came out in 2006, and it's a Carl Hiaasen book that was turned into a movie. The book was actually 2002, and then it was turned into a movie in 2006. It has Tim Blake Nelson in it, Luke Wilson, Brie Larson, a young Brie Larson, Logan Lerman, who is also the lead in Perks of Being a Wallflower. So he went on to do other movies too. But that's something that I was reading a little bit about it, and Carl Hiaasen was like, it's his first kids book. So where better to start than your own personal stories? Yeah. And he actually grew up in Fort Lauderdale, and the story is about saving like an owl sanctuary when big developers are trying to come in and tear the sanctuary down. So we were driving down to Key West for a Film Florida meeting, and I had mentioned it to you. So
I've never seen that movie.
But I'm so glad it was made here. Oh, also Jimmy Buffett. He plays the main teacher in Hoot. He just passed away recently. Rest in paradise, Jimmy Buffett. It's 5:00 somewhere.
See, that reminds me of Elmore Leonard is like a really prolific Florida writer, and he wrote a book called Rum Punch, which is set in Florida, set in Palm Beach County. Tarantino took that, turned it into Jackie Brown, turns it into an LA story, takes it away from Florida.
That's a shame.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's set at Palm Beach International Airport, and they moved it to LA for the Tarantino movie.
Interesting.
It would have been such a better movie if it was down in South Florida.
Right? Like you're taking away so much flavor that exists.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
But that's one thing that A24, speaking of this book, there's a lot of Florida stories that that's why they made the books, because they have Florida project
I'm shocked no one's made a movie about like the Western like history of Florida, like the Florida Cracker, which was like why they called them crackers was because they're cattle whips. But we have such a rich, like traditional Western flavor to pull from. I don't think there's ever been a Florida-based Western. I mean, it's not really in the West, but a cowboy movie. Yeah.
If you go to Tampa Bay History Center, they have an entire floor dedicated to that era of history. It's very, very cool.
Yeah. Enough with meth and gators. We can move on from that.
Yeah. So. That's another one, Crawl.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, Crawl, which shot... So what is Crawl for those who haven't seen Crawl?
Crawl is a movie about a very dangerous gator. Yeah. And throughout the movie, everyone's wearing UF gear. And it's very much set in Florida, but it was not.
No. I think they shot a little bit here, but the whole thing ended up being shot, I think, Bulgaria or someplace. Serbia, yeah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a hurricane, and the hurricane
that's what it is.
Washes in all the gators. So now they're trapped in their house with gators floating through it. So it's Barry Peppers in it.
But we're more than that.
Yes,
we
are.
More than gators.
That's right. More than spring breakers.
Yes. Spring break forever, y'all.
Well, I don't think we're going to top that. So with that, we'll end this episode. Where can they find us, Jesse Brock?
We are Loose Framing Podcast. You can stream us anywhere you listen to podcasts or watch us on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us at Film Tampa Bay.
And thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.